Hey folks, welcome back to day 13 of Basic Design. Today is two critiques. The first is the final five modes project, and the second critique is the first set of patterns. I like today because we get into the realm of meaning. So in the first critique, they go through and they make sure they can identify all five modes so that the students understand the strengths of the different modes of representation, how they can be used, and hopefully they can do that relatively effectively. Um, then I asked them to start talking about how are these things coming across. So, what each student has an insect, and they're representing it in a graphic, a gesture, a simple radical, or their ideal way. And we talked through. So, what do these things mean? How do these modes of representation change our interpretation of the bug? And this is where we get into a lot of the aspect of visual communication, visual art that is more interesting and is to some degree more subjective. Now, there is a huge degree of universal quality to aesthetics. There's lots of psychological, sociological tests of this. There's a great book by Stefan Sagmeister and Jessica Walsh called Beauty that tracks a lot of those things in a really approachable manner, going down to cross cultural, significant common threads of aesthetics down to even cross age, as in there are ways that they measure infants and toddlers cross culturally, their different attractions to visual experience uh, in some really unique ways. So it's not all subjective. I don't believe beauty is in the eye of the beholder only. Aspects of attraction, aspects of aesthetics are definitely based on taste. And so they're going through and it's like, what is this hornet? If someone's got a hornet, what does this crazy gestural drawing feel like? One of the things I like to do is list a bunch of things. So I go through and say, which one is most likely to be a logo? Out of all the students, each student has five of these modes on the wall. So we've got, nearly 100 up there on the wall. Which one seems to be the closest to being a logo? I've got them written down over here, everything I did. Which one's the most energetic? Which one's the most scientific? Which one's the most psychedelic? Which one's the most cartoony? Which one's the silliest? Which one's the most dangerous or the creepiest? And then I end with beautiful. And that one's a lot of fun. We had a really interesting conversation about our perceptions of what we mean when we say beauty, but how are they attracted to them? And you get to hear opinions. This is one of the things, like, I can't remember if I said it, but on the first day of class, I like to ask students what's a movie they never want to see again. The reason being is that students today are so reserved in sharing their opinions and they're so apathetic that they don't form opinions. And sometimes I'm asking them to do hard things. Here's a composition of all black and white squares. What do you think about it? Probably, if they were just walking through life and they happened upon this composition, they would almost think nothing of it. They would just walk by it, uh, understandably so. And I'm asking them to form these opinions. And so when I ask that question about a movie you hate, it's like, or a movie you would never want to see again, I'm like, I know there's an opinion there. And so often in our education system, we're not told to foster our own opinions, but rather to rehash the opinions of others, which is important. It's just strange that that's about the only thing we tend to do. And here in a visual arts class, you're supposed to form your own opinions. You're supposed to develop your own taste. You're supposed to think about and appreciate other people's opinions and other people's tastes. But ultimately, it's impossible to please everyone. It's impossible to make a painting that there isn't going to be some naysayer, at least out there, who doesn't like it. But then there's also just going to be tons of ways to communicate different things and to get across different ideas and to create unique experiences that some people are going to be reserved and not want to experience. And that's just the nature of the beast. And that's what I love about today is we start diving into that. So on the one hand, we're doing that with the black and white squares and we're talking about these opinions and people start telling stories. And one of my favorite things, which relates to a great Wendell Berry essay, is they start saying things like, it reminds me of. Like that's the power of art, is to bring up that reminder in us of our past. And so there was a great example of a football player in class today who liked one of the drawings of a wasp that someone made as one of their radical, as a silly, like it was basically a high school drawing of a muscle man with a wasp mask on and a stinging butt. Uh, it was silly, but he liked it. And then I was like, why? Like, why is that your most beautiful one? It's this football player, and he's not like he's not your cliche football player. Let's put it that way. He's a very interesting, intelligent guy who makes really great work. A lot of the athletes here at Hope College make great visual art. I think it's because they know how to use their bodies more, and they're more coordinated. But anyways, he said he liked the shoulders on him, and we all kind of joke around about it, and like he can take it very well. And then I start asking him more about that, and then I start pointing out to them. I said to him, what? No one else in the class was thinking about this particular drawing and its representation of shoulders. Why were you drawn to the shoulders? And he's, I don't know, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, you play football, you stand on the line. When you're sitting there on the line and you see a guy who has who has shoulders that are 4 inches wider than yours, what does that mean? He's like, that's intimidating. I was like, now you guys see why he sees the shoulders? Like his life revolves around that. I need to make myself wide. I need to be intimidating because one of his primary goals is to win at football. And so he sees that thing that we don't notice because we aren't attuned to that. And that's what beauty is so often. It's not a saying that other things are ugly necessarily. It's a noticing aspects that other people aren't going to notice. That's why beauty can be in the eye of the beholder, because all of us come with different perceptions, different nuances, different understandings. To think about the background of a person, what they're able to see. I think about this like before I had worked on my furnace. When I opened my furnace up, it was like a tangled mess of insanity and chaos. Now that I've worked on it and I've enculturated myself to understanding a little bit about HVAC, I can actually see it and it's organized. And so it's like I can see different things than I used to be able to see. And we're trying to get those nuances through. And all of that is like, it's fun. Like literally, the students are laughing more. They're explaining their position. They're saying, like, bear with me, but that reminds me of blah, 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 blah. And it goes along and it's really fun. And it's interesting to see students. Like I had one student literally say, I have never had people pay this much attention to something I've made. And it was really unique and a humbling experience for the student to have people like telling a story based off of something they made by drawing. So then we jump into the patterns. So it's a great, like, everything to here has been far simpler. We get to the patterns and it gets complex again. Again, they're combining multiple elements to create these patterns. And now they've made 12. They need to whittle it down to 6. So we do some set making. We talk about what we were looking for, and we dream about the fact that next class we get to use color finally. So they've moved through everything to color. They've designed these patterns in black and white with a little use of gray. And now they're going to be able to try to coordinate color into that mess. So that's what we're looking forward to. I'll see you Thursday.